There is a small stone tablet sitting in the basement storage of the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. Catalog number JE 2958. Most researchers who pass through those halls never stop to look at it. It's not gold. It's not painted. It doesn't have the dramatic presence of the objects displayed upstairs under glass. It's a limestone stele, roughly 4 feet tall, cracked along the left side, covered in hieroglyphic text that was carved sometime around 2,500 years ago. The curators call it the Inventory Stele. Egyptologists have debated its authenticity for over a century, and for the most part, mainstream scholarship has set it aside, classified it as a later fabrication, moved on. But hidden inside it is something that shouldn't exist. The Inventory Stele was discovered in 1858 by French archaeologist Auguste Mariette, excavating at the Giza plateau near the Temple of Isis. The text claims to be a record written in the time of Pharaoh Khufu himself, the man credited with building the Great Pyramid. But what the stele actually says is what makes scholars uncomfortable, because according to the inscription, when Khufu arrived at Giza, the Great Pyramid was already there, already old, already in a state of partial ruin that required restoration. And more than that, the text refers to a chamber, a hidden passage leading beneath the plateau, not to a tomb, not to a ritual space, to something the text calls the House of Osiris, Lord of Rosetau, a domain described as existing in tunnels below the ground. For decades, scholars dismissed it as symbolic. Then, modern science found something that changed everything. But before we get there, you need to understand what the word Rosetau actually means. Because if you've heard it before, you've probably heard it translated as a poetic name for the underworld, a mythological realm, the land of the dead. That's the standard interpretation. It appears in the Book of the Dead, in the Amduat, in the coffin texts. And yes, in those contexts, it carries spiritual weight. But the literal translation of Rosetau is not the underworld. The literal translation is the mouth of the passages, or, in some readings, the opening of the tunnels. Not a metaphor for death, a description of a physical place, an entrance. And that entrance was consistently, specifically, and repeatedly placed at Giza. If you're just joining this channel for the first time, subscribe now, because what you're about to hear is the kind of layered evidence that changes how you see one of the most studied places on Earth. Here's where it gets strange. In the 2nd century BC, the Greek historian Herodotus visited Egypt and recorded what the Egyptian priests told him. He wrote, in Book 2 of his histories, that beneath the pyramids of Giza lay a network of underground chambers connected by subterranean passages. He described these chambers as the burial place of sacred crocodiles, which was a known religious practice in certain Egyptian cults. But he also wrote something that historians tend to gloss over. He said the priests showed him the entrance to a system of rooms below the water level of the Nile, and that these rooms were numerous and extensive. He didn't say he went inside. He said he was taken to the threshold. That detail has been sitting there for over 2,000 years. Most people read it as Herodotus being gullible, misled by priests, getting confused. And maybe that's true. But here's the problem with that explanation. Herodotus wasn't the only one who said it. The Roman geographer Strabo visited Giza around 24 BC and wrote about a subterranean passage inside the Great Pyramid itself that extended downward at a steep angle into a chamber that appeared to lead further than it could. Reasonably B-mapped, he described an opening in the rock that felt to him like it connected to something larger than a single tomb. And then there are the Edfu Building Texts, a set of inscriptions found on the walls of the Temple of Edfu in Upper Egypt, dating to around 237 BC, but explicitly claiming to record information from a much earlier age, the so-called Age of the Gods, the Zep Tepi, the first time. Those texts describe a sacred island, a primordial mound, surrounded by water, where an ancient civilization built a network of underground enclosures, a domain of tunnels, a structure beneath the earth that was sealed and protected and deliberately hidden. The texts use the phrase, the sunken place of the divine beings. They describe chambers beneath stone. They describe a map of what lies below. Not a myth, not a metaphor. The Edfu texts read, in places, like an engineering manual written in religious language, and here is where the three clues converge. Clue 1 is the word itself, Rosetau. The ancient Egyptians placed this location at Giza with a precision that leaves no room for ambiguity. The funerary texts don't say near the Nile or somewhere in the desert. They say Giza. Specifically, they described Rosetau as lying west of Memphis, between the two horizons, which is a precise geographical bearing that places it exactly on the Giza plateau. The mainstream reading says this is metaphorical. The necropolis of Giza functioned as a stand-in for the underworld. But that explanation has a problem. You don't give a metaphor a compass bearing. You don't assign a metaphor GPS coordinates. When ancient texts specify direction, distance, and landmark, they are documenting a location. Clue 2 is the shaft. In 1935, a team of Egyptian antiquities workers excavating near the causeway of Khafre, the second Great Pyramid at Giza, discovered a vertical shaft cut into the bedrock of the plateau. They descended approximately 9 meters before abandoning it due to rising groundwater. The shaft was sealed, logged, and forgotten. Then, in 1999, Dr. Zahi Hawass, then Secretary General of Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities, authorized a new excavation of the same shaft. This time, they went deeper. What they found was a 3-tiered underground complex, cut entirely from the living rock. The first chamber, at 9 meters depth, contained sarcophagi. The second chamber, at around 15 meters, contained more burials and collapsed masonry. The third chamber, at approximately 30 meters below the surface, was partially submerged. In the center of it sat a basalt sarcophagus surrounded by water. The walls were carved. The chamber appeared designed, not natural, and the excavation was halted. Hawass attributed the flooding to the water table. The site was briefly opened to a select group of journalists in 2002, documented, and then closed again. It has not been fully excavated since. The lower reaches, the ones still submerged, were never fully mapped. They were sealed, they were logged, and then they were left. Clue 3 is the cave. In 2008, British explorer and author Andrew Collins was conducting research at Giza when he located an unregistered tomb on the plateau, a tomb that does not appear in the official catalog of Giza's known structures. Inside that tomb, he found something that had apparently gone unnoticed or unreported, an opening in the rear wall leading to a natural cave system. Collins and his colleagues explored the system and found it extended for hundreds of meters beneath the plateau. The caves were natural limestone formations, the kind created by ancient water erosion. But within them were man-made features, carved alcoves, passage modifications, evidence of deliberate human use. Collins reported his findings, submitted documentation. The Egyptian authorities acknowledged the caves, briefly confirmed their existence, and then access was restricted. The official response was that the cave system had been known about and was not significant. But no published excavation report exists. No geological survey of the full extent of the system has ever been released publicly. The researcher went quiet on the subject within a few years. The cave is still there, beneath the plateau, unmapped in its totality. Now, does this prove the most extreme version of the story? Probably not. The idea that there is a perfectly preserved ancient city beneath Giza, with libraries and machines, and a civilization untouched for 50,000 years, that version belongs to a different kind of documentary. But that doesn't make the discovery ordinary. What the evidence actually shows is this. The Giza Plateau contains at minimum a multi-tiered vertical shaft complex at 30 meters depth that has never been fully excavated. A natural cave system of unknown extent that has been accessed and then restricted. And ancient texts that use specific geographical language to describe underground passages at this exact location. The question is not whether there is something beneath Giza. The question is how extensive it is and whether someone already knows. Here's what makes the convergence so difficult to dismiss. In 2016, the ScanPyramids project, a joint initiative between Egyptian authorities and a team from French, Japanese, and Canadian universities, began scanning the interiors of the Giza pyramids using muon tomography. Muons are subatomic particles produced when cosmic rays hit the atmosphere. They pass through stone, but are absorbed at different rates depending on density. By measuring muon flux, you can see voids inside solid structures. The team found multiple previously unknown anomalies inside the Great Pyramid, including what was announced in 2017 as a large void above the Grand Gallery, at least 30 meters long, which has not yet been opened or identified. And then, separately, radar surveys conducted across the Giza Plateau, not inside the pyramids, but across the bedrock surface around them, have returned anomalous readings consistent with cavities at various depths beneath the surface. Those surveys have not been fully published. The team that conducted one of the most comprehensive plateau radar surveys in 2022 reported findings that were pending review. That review has not been publicly completed. They weren't guessing, they were recording. And what they were recording may be the outline of something we have not allowed ourselves to find yet. If what the evidence suggests is true, if the Rosetau texts are documenting a real subterranean complex beneath the Giza Plateau, one that was already ancient when the dynastic Egyptians began building above it, then everything we know about the timeline of organized construction in North Africa needs to be reconsidered. The cave system, the Osiris Shaft, the radar anomalies, and the ancient texts do not exist in isolation. They form a pattern of underground architecture at one of the most intensely studied sites on Earth, a site that, despite over a century of excavation, has never had its subsurface geology fully published. That is not an accident. That is a choice. And this is the question that the evidence leaves open. Not whether Giza has underground chambers, it clearly does, but what the full extent of those chambers is, and whether the texts that describe them were written by people who had actually been inside. Because if the Edfu priests, the Herodotus sources, the authors of the Inventory Stele, were all working from direct knowledge of a subterranean system at Giza, then someone at some point built that system, or found it, or lived in it. And our history of this plateau begins not at the beginning, but somewhere in the middle of a much longer story. The Osiris Shaft is still there, 30 meters below the surface, still partially flooded, still sealed. The cave system Andrew Collins entered is still there beneath the limestone. The radar anomalies are still unresolved. The ScanPyramids void is still unopened, and somewhere in the basement of the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, catalog number GA2958 sits in storage, a cracked limestone stele describing an entrance to passages beneath the rock, found in 1858, disputed for a century and still not fully explained. The mouth of the tunnels, that is what Rosetau means. Not a metaphor, a label. And whatever it was, labeling is still down there, waiting for someone to be allowed to look. If this investigation raised more questions than it answered for you, hit the like button and subscribe. We go this deep every single time. And when you're ready to keep going, the next video breaks down the sealed chamber beneath the Sphinx enclosure that GPR surveys have located and authorities have never opened. You won't want to miss it.